Now, Ecclesiastes is a book in the Old Testament, and most people think it was written by King Solomon. So here's the king here. Now, it might not have been written by him, but whoever it was who wrote it, it was somebody who was old and maybe approaching the end of their life. And what this person was doing was looking around at all the things and looking back over their life and trying to make sense of what life was all about. The author of the book of Ecclesiastes is thinking to themselves that life sometimes seems very mysterious and sometimes very unfair. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, why is it that one person dies young and one person grows to an old age? Why is it that one person's born into a happy family and one isn't? Why is it that somebody has a disease when they're young? Why is it somebody gets a good job and somebody doesn't? All kinds of things that the author is thinking about. And he comes to the conclusion that nobody can understand life except God. Now, that tells us that he's a believer in God, because he's not doing what so many other people do, which is to say, I don't think God exists. I don't think there is a God. I think we just make our own way in life. No, he's definitely a believer in God, and he realises that God's ways and God's plans are so much greater than ours. That's why we can't begin to understand. You know, it's like we've got a piece missing that helps us to understand all the things about God and the universe. There's something missing from our brains or from our minds or from our hearts or from our spirits, because we have so much trouble in understanding the idea of a God who's so far greater than us. Do you know why we have so much trouble? It's because of sin. Sin is what stops us. So this man is looking around and he realises that life throws up lots and lots of questions. Now the problem is because so many people don't believe in God, they think to themselves, we'll figure out the answer to life ourselves. Has anyone ever managed to do that? No. Outside of God, no one has ever managed to figure life out. No one's ever worked out all the mysteries and all the problems and all the answers and what lies beyond. No one's ever been able to do it. This is what it looks like with people trying to figure life out. What's this we're looking at here? What are we looking at there? What's here?
People climbing up a ladder.
Where's the ladder going to?
Into heaven.
Into heaven. They're thinking to themselves, surely we can make our own way there. Surely we can just figure this out and we can use our own efforts and our own brains and all the projects that we're going to do, and we're going to get lots of money together and we'll somehow figure out what all these things mean. But look, do you notice where the ladder goes? It doesn't get to heaven, does it? It doesn't get there, because what the book is telling us, that no one ever gets to God by trying to figure it out themselves. In fact, what God needs to do is get us to a place where we recognise that we can never do it ourselves and instead need to trust him. But the author of the book, he looks around and he tries to watch what other people are doing. He notices people are gathering money together and they think, this is what life's about, I must get all the money I can. And he watches people building big cities and big projects and thinks to themselves, if only I just build this city, then I'll have figured out what life's all about. And at the end of all their building projects, and maybe he'd done the same thing, they get to that point of realising none of this was worth doing. This was all meaningless. And he uses the words, it's like a chasing after the wind. Have you ever tried to chase after the wind? Have you ever tried to catch the wind? Yeah. It's frustrating, isn't it? Because you can't do it. It's like something you can never really do. And he says this is what it's like when people try to get to heaven themselves, when they try to build their big cities, when they try to do all these things, it never works. What do we have to do? And this is what the book's about. The book is about us getting to the point where we realise that only God can do these things. And we have to do it God's way. And when we get to that point, God says, okay, you can't get there yourself from earth to heaven. He says, but I can do something. I can send down the answer. He sends down Jesus from heaven to die on the cross, so that through believing in Jesus, that's the way to heaven. Nothing that we can do, it's what God did. Because it's not through my efforts to get to God, it's through what God did for me by sending Jesus, and my faith that Jesus' death on the cross paid for my sins so that I can be with God forever. God needs us to humble ourselves and confess our sin. Sometimes in the book of Ecclesiastes, the author says this: meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. And what he's saying, it's not meaningless for Christians, although life might seem a bit confusing at the moment. What he's saying is that life is meaningless when we try to live it outside of God. And he says this, he says, for everyone who comes into his family, everyone who becomes part of his kingdom, he says, you know, the day's going to come where I'm going to explain everything. I'm going to reveal everything. But in God's time, not in our time. Because we're very impatient. We always want the answers now, don't we? But God says, I'm going to give you all those answers. In fact, you're going to live with me throughout eternity. That means forever and ever in heaven with God. And during that time, we'll find out everything there is. And he'll put that bit back in our brain that's missing. And finally, when we get to see God, we think, oh, okay, now I've figured it out. And God says, I want that to happen. I want to have that relationship with you. He says, but I want it to be on his terms, not on our terms. It's through his work and not through our work.